When Mike asked me to do this little talk here, I had no doubt he was thinking about Luke 4:23, which says, "Physician, heal thyself," uh, which is really poignant to me because I had a pacemaker put on in about a month ago, so I got kind of close to death. Anyway, let's see if I can find my slides. There we go. This is a painting from 1520 by Hans Holbein the Younger, and it's entitled the Body of the Christ in the Tomb, the Dead Body of the Christ in the Tomb. It's really disturbing. It's a very disturbing picture, which death is a disturbing topic. So let's talk about physical death. Death is a very mysterious and inexorable problem in biology. And although any living creature can lose its life, no one, no creature, no created being can lose its death. Everyone's going to die. Every living thing is going to die. Everything that is alive will die. I think it went backwards.
Here's fun.
Yeah, there we go. Death is just an integral part of the biological world, which includes human beings. And if you're a real student, thanatology is the Greek word meaning the study of death. Okay, there we go. In the past, medical practitioners, death was taboo to them because we're all about trying to maintain and uplift life. But in modern medicine, people have come, doctors and medical personnel have come to understand that you really should study it so you can help people in that transition. It is difficult for families and it's difficult for the patients too, oftentimes, naturally. Let's see. Let's talk about, there are three basic elements of death. There's physiological death, and that occurs when the organs are no longer functioning. And for instance, the respiratory and digestive systems begin to slow down, breathing becomes more shallow, and patients have gurgling maybe and rattling, and that comes because secretions, they're not clearing secretions from their lungs, so they rattle. Dang. Okay, there we go. And digestion slows, and the patient develops anorexia, or is not hungry at all. And circulation slows, and the skin may become mottled, and the blood may pool by gravity underneath the body. And the dying person sleeps more and talks less. But it's important to remember they can still hear. So you want to be positive in your interact person. The second element of death is social death, and this is one of the most important ones because it oftentimes begins much earlier than the physiological death of a person or a being. And those with terminal illness may notice their friends, family, and even their medical providers say less and visit less. And that's because the providers and the family, they're in a quandary. They can't help, so they feel inadequate. And that is a mistake to feel that way, because some things just can't be changed. And it's better to be supportive. I, as a physician, always tried to be supportive to my patients with terminal illness. And I would always tell them, if you have a question, you need me, call me, and I'll get with you. So it's important. And, social support is important for quality of life and quality of death. And then the last element of death, we have physiologic death, social death, and then psychic death. And that occurs when dying persons begin to accept death and withdraw from others and regress into themselves. And it can take place long before physiological death and can bring physiologic death even closer. And people have some control over the timing of their death. And they can often hold off until an anticipated event like the birth of a grandchild or some important event or graduation or something like that. And
if they haven't told you something that they need to tell you.
yeah, that's true. That's really true. And we can all give up our will to live. That just is in our being. Let's see. This is a graph I took. It's just some of the symptoms of terminally ill patients from hospice care. Difficulty breathing is the most important one. And supporting that is difficult, I've found. We even used to try putting morphine into a breathing, like the little machine that nebulizes medicines, because it would coat in the lungs and help with the dyspnea feeling when a person is dying, and had some success with that. It's difficult. And then pain, of course, could be controlled. I know my own father, when he was dying, had quite a bit of abdominal pain, and they managed that with morphine, and it really eased his death. And then there's restlessness and agitation. Those other ones can be controlled, especially with narcotic medication. Death is an intrinsic, time-governed physiologic process. And your biologic timer is kind of set at conception. There's only so much energy that you have a battery life like to your life. And there's only so much energy that you can use in your life. And it's pretty much set. Your life force is received, of course, philosophers say from the cosmos, but we all know that it's actually from the Lord, from God. And the connector, the cable, if you will, that connects human beings to God is our soul and spirit. And that is the conduit through which comes into us. And both God and your spirit can't be scientifically objectified. You can't study it scientifically. But everyone understands what soul and spirit is because it exists through our subjective experiences like thoughts, memories, intellect, emotion, and our individual sense of reality. Every individual has a predetermined quota of how much vital force will be available. And when that quantum is exhausted, the physical body can no longer be charged and dies. And the connector to God, the soul and spirit, departs the body. It's kind of interesting if you look at between species, it's kind of set. You know, the Bible talks about 70 years is the average lifespan of a human being. And it's kind of true. For humans, it's 70 years. For dogs, it's on average about 14 years. For rats, about 2 years. And it's just kind of set. They have a quantum of life force. And when that more or less gets to that area, they can't be charged anymore and their physical body dies. Like I said, these considerations indicate that there's a set quantum of energy for a lifetime. And of course, you can affect that by your lifestyle to some degree, but not to a lot. It's kind of set. And if you live a good lifestyle, you'll probably live a little bit longer. You live a bad lifestyle with bad choices, you might not live so long. Let's see. I should have gotten my notes. Anyway, sorry, I'm looking over here, but I got to read this. The running of the biological clock depends on the quantum of life force and the pace at which that life force is expended. There are three types of cells basically in human beings, and they're non-dividing cells like your brain cells and your muscle cells, and then there's dividing cells like skin cells, and expanding cells like glands and kidney cells. And non-dividing cells have a limited lifespan and progressively diminish with time. Your brain cells, and along with my memory, are fading, and which is true. I mean, my memory is just not as sharp as it was when I was, say, 30 years old, and your body just begins to age, and your dividing cells have a set number of divisions that they can go through in a lifetime, and when they get to that set number, they begin to atrophy as well. And you can see that in your skin and hair if you're like me. And your skin atrophies and your brain doesn't work as good as it did when you were a youth. And the biologic clock depletes depending on pace and quantity of life. Let's see. Well, Mike mentioned unnatural deaths, and that happens, of course. You know, there are murders, there's car accidents, there's war, and the lowest common denominator of life is your heartbeat, your pulse, and circulation of blood. The body can be maintained alive through artificial support of circulation, and like a heart-lung machine with a bypass. When something or someone, say for instance, a gunshot wound prematurely stops circulation, the connector, the soul spirit, is in a quandary. You know, I can't maintain this machine going. And so it has a decision to make. And if it's bad enough, it will depart the body and the body dies. just some concluding thoughts that I had. There's a common belief that medical science has greatly lengthened life. It's kind of a misconception. Not a complete misconception, but it arises from the failure to distinguish between lifespan and life expectancy. And some interesting data that I read was if all coronary disease were eliminated, that's the number one killer of in medical diseases in the United States. If that were eliminated, it would only increase life expectancy by a little over 3 years. And if all cancers were eliminated, it would increase life expectancy by 3.5 years. So that's kind of an interesting concept. So your life is determined by the quantum of life force you receive and the pace that you use that life force up. Death is a natural facet of life and is ultimately causeless. I mean, it's programmed in to us as human beings. And really, I don't have any other written comments to make, but I did want to say this one thing. I have this theory myself about the fear of death. It's kind of like this. Some of it is, if you've ever had the wind knocked out of you, like in athletics or something, you know how urgently your body tries to get your breath back, and it's anxiety provoking. It's scary. You think, oh man, I can't catch my breath. Well, when you begin to die, your body wants to stay alive, and it just really fights to do that, and that causes you to feel a lot of anxiety. I think that has a lot to do with the fear of death. That's just my theory. And so that's my little lecture. Now, if you have any questions or we can discuss, just go right ahead. And no one has any questions? Yeah, Anna, go ahead.
I know people have heard this before, that they gave my mom 6 months to live, pancreatic cancer, and hospice nurse said, I can't believe how calm she is, because everybody I know has had pancreatic cancer, like freaks out, gets so anxious. And of course, I think it was a testament to her faith. And so therefore, there is fear in death, especially if somebody's not a godly person,
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, you are right about that. Kim's grandmother was almost 100, and she was her body was failing, and she used to say, "Why am I still here?" She was a good Christian, and I really don't think she feared death. I think that she accepted it, and she entered death pretty gracefully, and that does happen, so. Bill?
Roger, this idea of withholding death, it's intriguing to me. Of course, as an elder here, I was in the presence of several people who passed in past years. We had a brother here in the church that worked on my staff with us, and he got real bad off, had heart problems. He was in the hospital in Tulsa. They had already told him he would probably that day. His son lived in Denver. His son caught a flight and arrived in Tulsa. I was there at the hospital. He came in. His dad was still conscious. He visited with him briefly for maybe 5 minutes. And then about 15 minutes later, he died.
Yeah,
And of course, he just held on until that.
Yeah, that's an example of that.
And so it happens. It happens.
You can will yourself kind of to wait until you get to see someone or some event. Paul, go ahead.
I'd like to entertain some thoughts or your thoughts about when the brain activity ceases.
Yeah.
And my mother had a cerebral hemorrhage back when just about like 3 months after Dawn and I were married. And so we came back from school and went up to the hospital, and they had her on ventilator, and she was breathing, but her heart was beating and things were working. But he said, the amount of damage that's there, she says she's, her consciousness is not there anymore.
Yeah.
And back then, it wasn't really a big question about what you did. He said, well, we've tried turning off the ventilator and seeing if she will respond, her own body will respond without the aid of the ventilator. And she hasn't done that in the past, but we're going to do it one more time.
Mm-hmm.
And if she doesn't respond, then we're not going to start it again.
Yeah.
And, that seemed like a very sensible way of letting things happen as they should. 100 years before that, you didn't have that choice because you didn't have ventilators and that kind of stuff.
You're right.
So modern medicine has prolonged this.
And it's created some dilemmas.
It has. It has now become quite a legal issue. And
Yeah, it is.
people want to die and want to say, well, just let me go, just turn it off. And nobody wants to take the initiative to do that.
Right.
Because of all the legal ramifications.
Yeah.
But, I have a hard time dealing with when did that person die? Did their consciousness, of course, we don't know, I guess. We don't know exactly when the soul then leaves the body.
No. Those are
So-
very, very delicate issues. And, there's basically 3 states between life and death. And I was going to put them in slides, and maybe I should have, but I didn't. But anyway, there's brain death, which is defined a certain way. And then there is persistent or constant vegetative state, which is another form of existence, I guess. And then there's coma. And you can determine brain death, with the electroencephalogram and physical exam. They have certain criteria. They're just not responsive at all. And usually, I don't know so much in the United States, but in the United Kingdom, you have to be brain dead. Your brain stem has to be dead. In other words, you have to be supported with a respirator and supportive circulation and all that, And that can be fairly well defined. But then you come to coma and constant or persistent vegetative state. Those 2 areas are very, it's hard to define what they are. For instance, a person with persistent vegetative state can exhibit some kinds of awareness. For instance, if you go to feed them, they will swallow, they'll open their eyes, but they're not really, aware. They don't seem to be really aware, and they don't really interact with people. And so that's a difficult situation there. Go ahead, Jerry.
Question. If the brain, there is no wave, any kind of motion, when they can put it in there and they can see if there's anything there.
Right.
My mother was that way, and they kept her body alive by her heartbeat going until my dad arrived the next day.
Yeah.
And as soon as they took that off to cause that heart to beat, she was gone within less than a minute.
Yeah. She was brain dead, probably.
She was totally brain dead.
Yeah.
But everything was gone except for They could make her body, they could have kept it heart beating and
Oh,
blood
yeah.
going,
Yeah,
but her brain, as soon as they
yeah,
removed it.
you
it
have
was-
to,
Yeah,
to have a true life and awareness, you have to have a brain. So, yeah, you're right. And
it can't live on its own if that brain's gone there.
yeah, absolutely right.
And so
That's
that's what I
correct.
was trying to.
And,
get
you
to.
know, young people who are still alive, their body's still alive, but they're gone. You know, they often harvest their organs if they're in the organ donor program, and which is a good thing because it saves other people's lives. But anyway, persistent vegetative state and coma. As I said, persistent vegetative state, the person almost has some kind of reactions that looks living, and it's very difficult to know what to do with that. I mean, that's for the courts, system. Yes.
Well, I guess what I was ultimately getting to is that we need to know or have some idea of how to deal with a situation like that should it arise, because the family members sometimes have to make a decision. It's very
Oh,
difficult.
absolutely, yeah.
And, it's, and maybe Mike has been in this situation and has some insight into this, but
Yeah.
how do you counsel someone that has, especially if it's their younger kids and, the parents are
Yeah.
maybe, not that old and they're still, and they want to hang on.
I would, I don't know about, my wife and I have living wills, which gives our people who survive us, our family, guidance on what we want done in various situations. And I really encourage everyone should do that. In fact, when I had to go to the hospital in March, the 12th or whatever it was, they wanted a copy of my living will. And a lot of times if you go in the hospital, they will want you to fill it out or whatever, which is a good thing to do because it kind of states what you want done and doesn't leave your son or daughter or brother or sister going, oh, I don't know what they wanted. So, which is a tough situation.
Yeah, I might add to that living will is different than a DNR.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. That's
Medical and legal counsel have defined some of these things a little bit further. A family member can actually have power of attorney, but that doesn't necessarily mean power of attorney regarding life. So it can be power of attorney regarding material things, but not necessarily the life of the individual. So there's so many things that are actually a part of that. And if you have a DNR in the face of death in a hospital or something else, oftentimes a DNR is with your primary care doctor. So the hospital will not necessarily have access to the DNR. So you really ought to have a DNR in your possession in a file or something like that, in case a family member actually has to promote that. Otherwise than that, the doctors are going to do everything they can to
Yeah.
sustain life, which is what they're there for.
Yeah. That's pretty much true. Yeah. Sure. Go ahead.
It was just a comment that y'all were talking about the end of life issues. It's just something I read recently and the phrase stuck with me. And the phrase was, it used to be hard to live, but now it's easy to live and it's hard to die.
Yeah.
And I think that's
really true. You can end up supported I didn't get to finish I was talking about coma and persistent vegetative state. I wanted to mention to y'all, there's a guy, now I've forgotten his name, I have my notes, but he's a fairly young man. I think he was born in 1975, but when he was he lives in South Africa, and when he was age 12, he developed some kind of brain issue and went into a coma and this persistent vegetative state. And he was in that state for like 12 years, where he minimally responsive, but he had a really good family and they kept him alive and turned him so he didn't get bed sores and that various things like that. And they finally got him greater neurologic care. And they discovered, that he had part of his state was this locked-in syndrome, which is the only part of you that you can respond to people is with your eye movements. You're conscious, but you cannot, you can't speak, you can't move. You're totally dependent. Anyway, after 12 years, he just gradually woke up. And now he's a web developer, and he wrote a book called Ghost Boy, which is about his experience when he was in this locked-in syndrome, earlier in his life. Pretty interesting, So sometimes you don't want to give up on people in a coma or this persistent vegetative state because they may come out of it, which makes it even more difficult to decide, what you do with that. Yeah, with feedings and they're totally dependent care. So, Maria, go ahead.
Roger, did you notice a difference in people's attitudes when they were dying, if they were religious or not, or had a faith? Did you notice?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think people are comforted if and especially if their spiritual advisor comes to visit them, their minister or just their church, the people that they share their religion with. I think that helps a lot. I had a strangest, when I was first at the Indian hospital, this is a long time ago, 1988, 1989. I had an Indian man, he was dying, his family was there. But right before he died, he just kind of looked up and smiled real big, and then he just passed away. That was a very odd observation to make, So, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to reinforce the advice from you and from Mike and others that having the conversation through the living will and just conversations. We don't like to talk about death and what our wishes are, but that's very important. So when my brother had a brain aneurysm, he was left to, that decision, what do you do with that? Much like Paul's mom. And one doctor, the doctor that had operated on the aneurysm, was convinced that given 9 months, 12 months, he would recover from this and be a functioning person. Other doctors were like, he has no hope of ever being useful, living through this, right?
Yeah.
And most people don't live through brain aneurysms.
No.
But the doctor that did the surgery was like, oh, he's going to be fine, And so it was, even the doctors will disagree at times like that. So
Yeah.
for the family, it was very trying. And so it really came down to just really talking a lot about what my brother James wanted,
Right.
and what his wishes would be. Would he want to live in a state on a respirator, put away in a corner, waiting for this recovery that was most likely not coming?
Yeah. It's who was his next of kin and who made the decisions for him?
Mostly Karen and I, but his wife was just really struggling with it. So.
Yeah. And that's tough on you, but you probably knew him best and knew what his,
We had gone through it with my mom, and so we
Yeah.
were aware of what his wishes were.
yeah. Okay. Can I turn this off?
Roger for speaking that. He's still available for questions too, as we kind of go through here a little bit. I want to approach it almost from a like a hospice side, and to think about the idea of what happens, as people approach death. Death is a process. It is a natural process. I think that that we understand out of some of this, and so there are some characteristics about people as they approach this process. 1 to 3 months beforehand, there can be reduced appetite, reduced thirst, increased sleeping. There can be weight loss that goes with that, and actually there can also be mild euphoria of happiness type thing as well too, which seems strange to us, but maybe part of that is the faith, right, which is part of the peace that goes along with it. My experience with people throughout the years who come actually from different beliefs as well too, is that there is this belief in something more than what we are. There is a belief in a creator. There is a belief in a force. Whatever it is that people believe in somehow or another, that actually the brain provides some peace and sometimes some freedom that goes along with that. Our prayer is that they might know the God of the Bible, right? The God of heaven. And so all of those things are really natural, and they're actually an expected part of the journey. So there's a part of that. I might also tell you that I witnessed men and women are alike, are different. I'm sorry. They're different in this approach. Men carry this pride of life that goes, which is part of our detriment a lot of times, where women are just open to talk. That difference exists there. There's also the fact, 1 to 3 months can be the idea of this withdrawal from society. People, we realize people don't like to talk about death. And maybe we don't even like to think about our own death. And so there's a withdrawal from culture, society, or from family sometimes. There's regret as well too. It is, I think it's my privilege a lot of times to be with people as maybe they get the news of a terminal illness or something like that, and somehow or another I don't have any more power than anybody else does or anything like that, but somehow or another they feel comfort in the fact that they can talk to somebody that believes in God and encourages them, strengthens them. I also, there is one thing particularly that I realized that I strive to do, which is part of this regret thing, is that I strive to help them to understand that their sins are forgiven by Jesus Christ. And so there's no fear regarding that, and fear in death. And I had an occasion just recently with the idea of somebody who is facing the end of life, and they wonder whether they ought to talk to their son or daughter about certain things that have happened. And we just talk through that, as we deal with that. Jerry?
back when I was an elder and I'm in a lifetime, I have yet to find some people that lost loved ones, that the one that's still left says, I wished I had said this to them while they were alive.
Yes.
And I make this point. Always say what you want to say to the people you love while you've got them.
Yeah.
Because once they're gone, you lose that opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's gone.
Yeah.
And it'll stay with you for many years after that. I wished I had said and done this while they were alive.
Yeah.
And it's very important that we realize that as a Christian and as a human being, to
Yeah.
say that to the ones you love and those around you.
I might add a few more things to that in just a minute. If you're talking about 1 or 2 weeks before people die, Roger can probably speak to this. The body temperature changes. It can fluctuate. Lower blood pressure happens. Irregular pulse can happen. You have increased sweating as well too. Skin color changes. Breathing changes. There's less or no talking sometimes, as you face the last couple of weeks of one's life. There's more sleep. There's more confusion. Their senses change, whether it's smell or whatever it is. I do want to emphasize medicine has learned that one of the last senses to leave is hearing. And Roger mentioned this. So, I would tell you up until the very end, hold their hand, tell them you love them, reassure them in any way. The other side of that is there might be some things that you ought to not talk about while you're in their presence. You understand that? So they may become more restless. And part of that is a natural body function because the oxygen is lower because they're not breathing as well. There's normal body changes that happen with that. Some people experience delusion. Some of that delusion can come with medication as well too. Hallucinations can take place. I've been in the presence of people that pick things out of the air or something like that, or even the expression as they look up in their mind toward heaven that they see somebody. I cannot tell you whether that's true or not true. And so those things happen. Days or hours before death, sometimes there's a surge of energy. Maybe some of you experienced that with some of your loved ones. It seems like, and there's this anticipation because we hope that they'll get better. But with that surge of energy is extra exertion, which will soon make them crash, right? And so breathing becomes slower, less regular, sometimes rapid, followed by no breathing at all. I don't know whether you've been in the presence of that. And so change in the color of the body. Oftentimes you'll see hospice people either pinch the thumbnail or something like that, or particularly when the body shuts down. Typically it begins in the feet and it works up its way up into the body. And like Roger said, the blood pools toward the back of the body, however gravity wants to pull it that direction. So with that in mind, you also realize that oxygen and blood is also limited to the brain. So it's natural that delusions come, part of that. I also thought about the idea of frequently asked questions, and I got a little time here. Sometimes I hear the question, how long does the last stage of dying last? So they haven't eaten, or they really haven't taken any sustenance or even thirst, right? You'll see nurses or hospital care actually soak like a sponge on a swab, right? Which is comforting in the understanding of dry mouth and those type of things. So the nature of the illness and the nature of medications can either lengthen or shorten the last process of dying. Are there common signs of the end of life? Which is another thing. And one is shortness or the wetness of breath. Roger talked about the idea of the gurgling, right? Or the rattling, sometimes is what they say. Because the body is shutting down, the lungs respond and throws off mucus. It throws off wetness that happens with that. And so that's where the rattling comes from. Cold hands and feet. Other things like incontinence takes place. Constipation, fatigue, restlessness. And it's amazing to me because I've been in situations where the body is dying, but brain activity is still there. I might also say to this, Roger and I are pacemaker brothers. Both of us have pacemakers. In the situation of the idea of pacemaker, a pacemaker can actually continue to make the heart beat, even when the body is shutting down. And on those occasions, there have been times in which the medical professionals had to get together, and a cardiologist had to be, brought into consultation, and a decision had to be made. Will they live beyond the pacemaker? And what happens with that, Roger? You and I might experience this. There's a magnet that's placed over the top of the pacemaker to make it stop. And so sometimes you have those life-supporting things that happen with that. Okay. Another thing that happens is how long after one stops eating will they die? And that depends on the illness once again. It can be as just a matter of a few days, or it can last up to 10 days. And on some occasions, it might be a couple weeks. So you just don't know. Another question that I've faced with families is should you leave a dying person alone? And I think everybody has to answer that question for themselves individually, but I think my preference, and I shouldn't say preference maybe, my advice to you would be don't regret not being there. And I know it's difficult for you. It's not difficult for the person who's dying because they're dying. But I would encourage you to be there in the last moments of comfort, somehow or another, was holding a hand or something like that. Now, there's other things that I would say to you that I might address the next time that we get together next Wednesday evening, just to add to things. There are things I think that you can do as family, which is helpful for the one who's dying. And I'll try to put that in a sheet if I can. Anthony, can you pass these out real quick? I came across this that I wanted to give to you. But I'll try to address a few things next time. Mary, did you want to say something?
and Shirley dying. I've been there by the bedside for 2 weeks, and Mike came in and he said, "Come on, you need a break." And so he took me with him for a drive. Both of the brothers have walked out, and my dad had gone out to get some candy. When he came back in from getting the mail, and went into the store, she was gone. And I truly believe, and I felt that. I knew she was gone. I told Mike we need to get back home now. And we did. And she had just passed away, but we had all been in the room with her. And I think she didn't want us to be there when she passed.
There, I made the statement early on that we're all different. I've seen occasions that we've spoken to that, a loved one held out until a grandchild got there. They were told a grandchild's going to be there. And you have those stories that are part of that. I think what Mary speaks to as well, sometimes as long as people are there and sometimes as long as noise being heard all the time, I don't know what happens, whether the mind keeps that going. But sometimes there are people that just want to pass alone and pass when it's quiet. I can't answer when that is. I don't know anybody that can answer when that is. But I would just tell you, in the last moments of somebody's life or your loved one's life, don't regret whatever it is. Whether it's the idea of grabbing a hand and telling them you love them all over again, whether it's the idea of singing a song and music. There's just some peace that goes along with that. Okay. All right. I need to end. Any last comments as we end here? All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for creating us. And Father, thank you for the hope and peace that is ours to understand that this life that we are living now and these bodies that we exist in are only temporary. But Father, for the hope, for the knowledge, for the promise that you give to us of eternal life. Father, thank you that this life is not the end, but it's just the beginning. And we don't know what that transition is like, but we trust you and we trust in the promise that Jesus says, "Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of this age." And so some of us, perhaps most of us, will pass before the end of the age. The Christian age actually ends, and before you put an end to this world in which we exist. So, Father, help us to live our lives in such a way and maintain a trust and a faith in you in such a way, Father, that we do not fear death. Thank you for the life that you've given to us. Thank you for the gift of your Son, Jesus Christ, and for the hope that we have and the hope that we will one day die in. And we know, Father, that you will not disappoint us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.